Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to today's webinars, all about interviews. Very excited to be with you. We're going to give folks a moment to get in and get settled, so we will kick things off momentarily. Thanks for joining. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. So if you're just joining us, welcome. Um, Thank you for joining today. My name is Britt from Team Handshake. I am very excited to welcome you all to today's session. Couple of quick notes before we get started. We're going to have about 30 minutes of discussion, and then we'll save about 10 minutes at the end for questions from you. So you can submit any questions you want to ask in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer some of them before the end today. We will probably not get to everybody's, but if we don't get to your question, we will use it to help inform future events just like this. So please let us know what's on your mind, and hopefully we'll have some time to chat about it. I also wanted to quickly call out, if you weren't aware, we are running a giveaway this back to school season. It actually runs through Thursday, the 16th. We're giving away $30,000 worth of prizes for folks who take a couple of key steps in Handshake to kick off their career and get started. So we're posting some information about that in the chat. Please check it out. And yeah, you can find out how to enter and hope you win. Great. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. And with that said, I am so excited to dive into today's topic because, like many of you, I'm sure, I, even at this point in my career, get really intimidated by the idea of job interviews. I've been with Handshake for 8.5 years, and low-key, I kind of continue saying because I'm scared of interviewing. So I'm going to benefit from this session too. Um, but you all know interviews can be stressful, they can be confusing. It always seems like you're saying the wrong thing. Um, it's not unique to you. It's not unique to me. Everybody feels this way. And if you are in the middle of the fall recruiting season, probably doing some version of this. And you're potentially thinking about the types of interviews that you might encounter. So that's what today's session is all about. I want to introduce you to today's speaker, who is a seasoned recruiter, spent countless hours interviewing, and is here to chat with you all about the do's and don'ts of job interviews of all types. Jamie, do you want to introduce her to the audience?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie. I'm a recruiting manager here at Handshake. I joined Handshake late last year as the founding recruiter for one of our new human data and AI products org, basically a startup within Handshake that's focused on building the next generation of AI products for both students and graduates. Previously, before Handshake, I worked at a couple high growth startups, companies like Verkada and Chime, where I focused more on product and design recruiting. And then before that, I started my career at a recruiting agency right out of college. So I've seen the interview process from just about every angle, from scrappier startups to larger, more structured teams. And then before that, I'm a first generation college graduate from UCLA, which really shaped how I think about both access and opportunity in hiring. I come from a blue collar family, so a lot of the my journey has been figuring out things on my own or learning from people that I meet along the way. It's a big reason I love what I do, helping people feel more confident and supported during probably the one of the more stressful parts of the job search.
Absolutely. Well, Jamie, we're really grateful you took the time to be with us today, and let's dive right in. So, I think something that would benefit everyone before we get into the tactics of what and what not to do during an interview, let's talk basics. So, can you share a quick overview of the different types of interviews early career professionals, like folks on the line, who are in the interview process for an internship or a post grad job, might encounter?
Yes, definitely. There are a few common types of interviews that you'll encounter, and Each one is really designed to reveal something different about how you work, how you think, and collaborate. Behavioral interviews are probably their most common. These focused on your past experiences, the times you faced challenges, worked on a team or delivered certain results. These typically start off or hear questions around, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of. The interviewer is trying to understand your decision-making process and how you've handled real situations in the past. They're less interested in hypothetical answers and more in what your actual experiences say about your approach and values. Next are situational interviews, which are more forward-looking and hypothetical. So instead of asking you what you did, they focus on what you would do in a certain scenario. So for example, you might be asked questions around, what would you do if two stakeholders or teammates disagreed on priorities? Or how would you handle taking over a project that's behind schedule? These types of questions are meant to show how you think on your feet, prioritize and adapt to challenges that you don't have, one obvious solution. Next are case interviews. So these ones tend to appear in consulting or strategy or certain like product management type of roles. They are structured problem-solving exercise, really designed to test how you analyze data, reason through complex questions, and communicate your thinking. A typical case might involve business challenges like, how would you help a company improve profits, or how big is the market for a new product? And the goal isn't necessarily to get to the right answer, it's just to show how you approach a problem that doesn't necessarily have one. A favorite example of mine was when I was at Chime, and one of my hiring managers used to ask product manager candidates how they would build an ATM for a baby. It sounds funny at first, but it's actually a really great prompt. And again, the goal isn't to see if someone could actually design an ATM for a baby. It was to understand, how they think about their users, define constraints, structure their thinking, and approach a challenge that's completely unfamiliar to them. Because no one has done it before, there's no playbook. The interviewer wants to see how you clarify the problem, identify what the user actually needs, and, creatively reason your way towards a solution. Um, and then finally, technical interviews. These ones are most common for engineering, data, analytics types of roles. They focus on specific skills such as like coding, debugging, system design. But technical interviews, kind of similar to case interviews, reveal how you approach an unfamiliar problem and how you reason through trade-offs and how you think under pressure. Each one of these interviews highlights is a different dimension of your abilities from, collaboration to communication to structure your thinking and technical expertise. So, yeah, understanding what each of these ones is trying to uncover really helps you know what to expect and how you can bring yourself, your best self to the conversation.
Awesome. It was a really good overview. Okay, so then let's fast forward. So imagine that folks in the audience have gotten that interview invite that they've been seeking. What kind of prep work do you recommend candidates do ahead of interviews?
Mhm. Yes. So this is a big one. Preparation is everything. Even a little bit of preparation goes a long way. It helps you feel more confident, more grounded, and ready to tell your story in a way that really connects with the interviewer and the company. So, for general prep, regardless of the role, I would say start by researching the company and role, not just what they do, but why they do it. So, what is the problem that they're trying to solve? Why are they different from their competitors? Understanding these bigger contexts helps you speak to the company's language and show genuine interest and helps you stand out as an interviewer. Um, Next, read the job description. I'm sure you have at this point, but carefully think through a few examples that highlight how your skills can line up with the company and what they're looking for. You don't need to memorize a script, just know a few key stories that you might want to draw from. And then finally, for general prep, I would say practice introducing yourself clearly. Your story should flow naturally. So, um, connect the dots between your background, your projects, what you're excited about next, what you're looking for in an employer. A confident conversational intro really sets the tone for the whole interview. For behavioral or situational interviews, again, these are the ones that are the tell me about a time when. I would recommend looking at the job description and think through some questions that you think an interviewer might ask and practice your answers. So, to stay organized, I always recommend using the STAR method or STAR framework. It's a simple way to structure your answers. For those that don't know, STAR method or STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So, for situation, set the scene, give a little context to the interviewer of what the story is that you're going to tell. For task, you explain your responsibility or goal. Action, you walk through specific steps that you take or took, and then result. So end with the outcome, ideally something measurable, or what you learned and how you might do something different in the future. This type of structure helps you stay focused and ensures you're telling a complete story. For case interviews, I would say before your case interview, get familiar with the type of format, what's being tested. Typically, it's structured thinking, problem solving, communication. Practice a few sample cases. There's a ton online, oftentimes on like Glassdoor or Reddit. Review basic frameworks and then learn to organize your ideas clearly. So again, you don't need to memorize, but just focus on logical, clear storytelling and a confident delivery. For technical interviews, before your technical interview, I would recommend review core concepts and practice problem solving aloud, similar to the case interviews. Do a few mock questions before. Um, Focus on your like clarity and reasoning, not just memorization. Brush up on fundamentals and practice explaining trade-offs and debugging steps as if you're like teaching someone else, I think is probably the best way to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, those case and technical interviews, there are a ton of resources online you can go out and find. I remember being in the car with my brother when he was practicing for case interviews, and I think he was listening to a podcast about it. And I had to just drive there in silence. It was really quite an experience. Okay, great. Love that. Also, before we move into the next section, I wanted to remind everyone, if you have questions for Jamie, you can drop them in the Q&A box. We'll have a little bit of time at the end of today's session to run through them, so don't be shy. Okay, so Jamie, let's move on. Um, I'd like to center us on the topic for today's session, which is the do's and don'ts of interviewing. So we'll start with the negative. Let's do some cautionary tales. Can you talk about some common mistakes you see during the interview process, especially from folks who are early in their careers, like folks who are on the line today?
Yes. So that is a great question. And I love that we're starting with the don'ts because a lot of interview mistakes are completely unavoidable, kind of once you know what you're looking for. Um, so the first big one is not preparing. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but you can always tell when someone shows up to an interview without doing even a little bit of research. And it's not that as the interviewer, we expect you to be an expert on the company, but even a small amount of preparation signals both curiosity and care to the employer. Um, Early career candidates sometimes underestimate how far this goes. So I'm not saying spend, hours and hours, but just spend like 10 or 15 minutes reading on the company's mission, what problems they're solving, who their users are and what makes them different from competitors. That context helps you connect your story to what matters to them. Um, the second I would say is speaking negatively about past experiences or people. Um, Another common one, especially early on in your career, is really just like venting about a bad internship, a tough professor, or, a frustrating group project. It's totally human to have those experiences, but in an interview, it can actually reflect more negatively on you than the situation that you're in. So what interviewers are really listening for is self-awareness. Can you take something that didn't go perfectly and talk about what you learned? So a common one is, talking bad about a manager. So don't say, my last manager was really horrible at communication and made everything so stressful. Instead, reframe it. I've learned that clear communication and alignment are really important for me in a manager. In my last role, I sometimes had to take extra initiative to make sure we were on the same page, which, taught me how to be proactive about clarifying expectations. That kind of reframing, although small, it shows a lot of maturity and reflection, which are qualities that really stand out, especially when you're looking for a job or internship early in your career. Um, the third I would say is trying to fake it instead of showing curiosity. This is a big one. If you don't know something, just say so, especially when you're early in your career. You're gonna come across questions in the interview process that you likely haven't experienced yet, and that's okay. Interviewers can usually tell when someone is stretching the truth, and it really hurts your credibility. I would say what impresses people more is curiosity and a willingness to learn. So, for example, saying something like, I haven't used that exact tool, but I'm familiar with similar ones and would love to learn more about how your team uses it and applies it. Perfectly okay. It tells the interviewer that you're honest, you're self-aware, you're teachable, and you have that like growth mentality. Most teams aren't hiring you because you know everything. They're hiring you because you can learn quickly, collaborate well, and ask smart questions. Um, for behavioral interviews, a common mistake is being too vague. So, behavioral interviews, again, that tell me about a time when a common early career mistake is answering too generally. For example, I usually do well under pressure, or I try to communicate with the team. Those type of answers don't show the how that you did it. Again, the key is using the STAR method. Give context, explain your role, describe what you did, and then share the outcome that you learned. Even a short example like managing a tight deadline in a class project, it can be a strong answer when it's told with structure. It shows that you can reflect, organize your thoughts, and then connect to real impact. For case interviews, rushing is probably the biggest mistake for candidates going into, product consulting strategy roles. Case interviews can feel very intimidating. And one of the most common mistakes is rushing straight to an answer. Interviewers aren't testing how fast you think, they're testing how you think. They want to see your reasoning. So take a moment, clarify the problem, outline how you're going to approach it, and then explain your thought process step by step. That's what case interviews are about essentially, is structured and creative thinking. Um, in them, as I mentioned before, there's rarely one right answer, but there's a clear difference between someone who rushes and someone who pauses to think it through. Um, for technical interviews, I would say a common mistake here is working through a problem silently. It's kind of related to the one I mentioned about the case interview, but candidates sometimes think that they need to get to an answer first and then explain it and how they got there, but interviewers actually want to hear your process. Again, similar to the case interview. Talk through your logic, your assumptions, what you're testing, and where you might be uncertain. Even if your final answer isn't perfect, I would say, make sure you're walking them through your reasoning. It shows how you problem solve, and that's often what's gets you to move forward. So again, just to sum it up, the biggest don'ts I see from early career candidates, when you go into interviews with, honesty, curiosity, and self-awareness, you stand out because you're showing not just what you can do, but who you are and how you learn. And and that's what interviewers remember most.
Love it. Okay, so instead of going to the do's, we're going to do a little change up. So I'm curious, what about don'ts on the interviewer's side? So how can someone who's new to interviewing look out for red flags when they're mid-interview? So again, for folks on the line, if you are in an interview, what should you be looking out for that might tell you something about the company you are interviewing to join?
Yes. That is a question we don't talk about enough. Interview mistakes can happen on the company side too. It's really valuable, especially early in your career, to spot those signals early on. Especially when you're just starting out, it's easy to feel like you're the one being evaluated, but the truth is interviewing goes both ways. Like you're trying to find and gather information about whether this is a place that you can learn and do and grow and do your best work. Um, One big red flag that I think is important to call out is when an interviewer can't clearly describe what success looks like in the role. If they struggle to explain how performance is measured, or if, what your first few months would focus on, it usually means that expectations aren't aligned internally, and it can make it harder to succeed once you're there. Also, pay attention to how they engage with you. If they seem dismissive of your questions, give you vague answers, or, appear unprepared, it can signal low engagement or disorganization. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to walk away from the opportunity, but it's worth noticing and definitely can ask follow-up questions later on in the process. Um, you as an interviewer deserve clarity about what you're walking into. Ask thoughtful questions about growth and feedback, how success is defined and how the team collaborates. Um, and when you're listening to their answers, I would say, like, notice how they make you feel. It can trust your gut in that way. Do they genuinely seem interested in you and your growth? Do they communicate clearly? And are they respectful of your time? At the end of the day, those cues tell you a lot about what it's actually like to work there. So even while you're trying to make a great impression, remember you're choosing them too.
Totally. The point you made about like organization is especially striking when you think about hearing back after an interview. I know people always ask questions about this. Maybe we'll end up having a question later in the session, but um, you can go on an interview and then wait for quite some time to hear back. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't get it. There could just be like disorganization on the other side too. So something you might pick up on in the interview um, can help you feel a little bit better afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move into the do's. Not putting anyone on blast there, certainly, but just saying I've experienced that in the past. Um, okay, moving on to do's. If you had to put it succinctly, when it comes to interviewing, what takes someone from average to great?
Yes. So this is something that everyone wants to know. Um, the truth is, it's not about perfection. It's about authenticity, curiosity, and connection. The best interviews aren't memorable because the candidate had flawless answers. They stand out because the person felt genuine and engaged. They listened, asked thoughtful questions, and showed a real interest in the work and the people behind it. Um, Interviewers rarely remember every word you say, but they remember, your skills, your attitude, your openness, and that sense of, I'd love to work with this person because they have the skills that we need and are looking for, and they'd be a great teammate when times are tough. So what takes someone from average to great is, yes, being prepared, but also being present. So showing up as yourself, curious, thoughtful, and human is really what leaves a lasting impression.
Love it. Okay, so then let's get tactical. Jamie, walk me through your most essential do's for the interview process. And since we've been doing it already, let's just maybe break it down by the different types of interviews you introduced earlier.
Yes, 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 yes. So I'll start with the basics, things that apply across everything, every interview type. The first is ask thoughtful questions. So this is one of the easiest ways to stand out, especially early in your career when um, when you ask meaningful questions about the company, the team, the work, it shows that you care about the why and not just the what. So, for example, instead of asking, what is this team structure like? You might ask, how does this role that I'm interviewing for apply and contribute to the company's larger mission? What does success look like in the first 6 months? Those types of questions can turn the interview into a dialogue rather than an interrogation. And then also on the flip side, you also tend to get more information from the interviewer that way, and it can lead to great dialogue. Second, I would say use stories to make your experiences tangible. So even if you don't have years of professional experience, you still have stories, class projects, part-time jobs, volunteer work. Um, People can connect with stories because it reveals how you think, not just what you did. So it's one thing to say, I'm a problem solver. It's another to share a short story about a time you had to get creative to meet a deadline with limited resources. And that's what sticks with people. Um, and lastly, for the general interview dues, I would say follow up is a big one. It sounds really simple, but a simple thank you note or email after the interview genuinely matters. It's not about the like formality of it, it's about the connection. So it gives you a chance to not only express gratitude for their time, but if relevant, clarify or expand on something that you discussed. You can say something along the lines of, I really enjoyed our conversation about your product strategy, and I've been thinking about how that approach might scale for new markets. It's short, thoughtful, keeps the conversation going. And those small touches, the curiosity, storytelling, and follow through are what make you memorable beyond your resume. Um, Now, when it comes to behavioral interviews, the classic tell me about a time when, the key is preparation and reflection. So the best candidates don't pull examples out of thin air. They've taken time to think about a few meaningful experiences that show qualities like leadership, problem solving, and adaptability. You don't need 20 stories, just two or three strong ones that you can adapt to different questions. So, for example, one story about leading a class project could also show collaboration, ownership, or handling conflict. It's all about how you frame it. Um, when you're answering, remember the STAR method. But I would say for this one, the real like do that separates a good answer from a great one is connected to who you are now. For example, that experience taught me how to step into a leadership role when I wasn't the most senior person in the room. And it's something that I try to bring to team projects today. That type of reflection shows growth. It tells the interviewer that, you know, you don't just do things, you learn from them. And that's a sign of someone who will continue to grow on the job. For case interviews can feel especially intimidating because they're so open-ended. The best thing that you can do here is use structure to frame your answer, but not box yourself in. So you'll often hear about the frameworks. There's a ton online, and those are great tools. But the goal isn't to memorize every framework from a prep book. It's to understand the thinking behind that. So in my previous example, when I was at Chime, the hiring manager asked, how would you build an ATM for a baby? And it's a weird question, but a great one because it forces you to step back and define the problem. Who is the user? What are their needs? And what constraints would you have? And that's what the case interviews are testing. How do you approach something new? How do you ask clarifying questions? How do you organize your thoughts in uncertain problems that you're solving? So take a few seconds to think before your answer, talk through your reasoning step by step, show the curiosity, and even ask, can I clarify how we're defining success here? It tells the interviewer that you're engaged and thoughtful. And again, goal isn't having a perfect answer, it's showing that you're clear in your communication, you're flexible and problem solving, have a problem solving mindset. For technical interviews, I would say whether it's data analysis or coding or system design, the biggest do is to communicate early and often. Interviewers want to hear your thinking process. So you might be walking through, debugging code or scoping a data pipeline, but in every case, they're listening for your logic, your assumptions, how you handle uncertainty when problem solving. They can't see inside your brain, so it's best to communicate what you're thinking and bring them along. So narrate your thought process, here's what I'm thinking. I'll start by checking this part of the product because, that usually rules out the most common issue. It gives the interviewer a window into how you reason. It also helps them help you. Interviewers often want to nudge you in the right direction, but they can if they don't know where your head is at. Um, and if you get stuck, which often happens, like don't panic. I would um, say something along the lines of, I might be missing something here. Can I talk through another approach? That honesty and adaptability goes a long way. Um, you should review your fundamentals. You don't need to memorize every solution, but being comfortable with the core concepts lets you focus on your communication instead of, the actual problem. But I would say if there's one do that ties all of these interviews together, I would say treat the interview as a structured conversation, not a test. This type of shift in mindset changes everything. You start listening better, you ask better questions, and you respond more naturally. Interviewers aren't trying to trip you up; they're trying to imagine working with you. So show them that version of you. Show them the person that's curious, the person that's reflective and engaged. And that's what great interviewing really is. It's not having about the right answers, but about building connection.
Absolutely. Really great tips. And I would say on that last point as well, recruiting is time intensive and it's expensive. Like if you're interviewing, they are excited to talk about you. They want it to work out. So don't lose sight of that like mindset. Like it would be really great if you interviewed and got this job for you and also for them. Cool. Okay. So before we get into our Q&A portion, I want to spend a little bit of time on some real talk. Sometimes we simply don't nail it at an interview, and that is not fun. That said, do you have any advice for someone who might be feeling demoralized after a bad interview or interview streak and how they can bounce back to build confidence?
Yes, yes. Very, very important question because everyone has been there, myself included. Um, you walk out of an interview and immediately start replaying every word in your head. You think, why did I say that? Or I should have given this other example. It's a very human and normal reaction, especially when you invest your time and energy and you care a lot about the opportunity. Um, my biggest advice is don't over-identify with one experience. A single interview or even a streak of them is just a data point, not a definition. It doesn't define your worth or your potential or your future at all. It's just one moment in time where two people were trying to figure out if it was the right fit. Um, Sometimes it's not even about you. It's about the timing, the team needs, some internal changes that you'll never see. So instead of thinking, I failed that interview, try reframing it as that experience gave me more preparation for the next one. When you've had a tough interview, I would say resist the urge to immediately overanalyze everything. Give yourself a little space, even a day or two to step away, go outside, and do something that reminds you of who you are outside of the search. And then once you've had a breather, reflect on it from a place of curiosity, not criticism. You can ask yourself, what specifically threw me off? Was it a question that I didn't expect from the interviewer? Did I get nervous because I hadn't practiced that story? Or um, did I just not feel aligned with the company culture? And that type of reflection, it really helps you see patterns without spiraling into self-doubt. And it turns that experience into like more learning and less judgment on yourself. Um, a common myth about interviewing is that people sometimes think interviewing is this innate talent, like you're either good at it or you're not. But in reality, interviewing is a skill that you build. It's the pattern recognition, the communication and storytelling, all things that you can practice to get better at. So one of the best ways to build confidence is practicing out loud. I do it for when I'm preparing for an interview. You can do it in front of a mirror, you can record yourself, or even ask a friend to do mock interviews. Um, the goal isn't to memorize answers, it's to get comfortable hearing your own voice, telling your story and taking that moment to pause when you need to think. The more you practice, the less that any single interview feels like a make it or break it type of moment. And the more you start seeing it as a conversation between two people. Um, and when you're in the middle of a job search, it can feel like every no is really the end of the world, but truly, you don't need 10 offers. You just need one yes, that one opportunity that clicks. And every interview, even the ones that go sideways, are moving you closer to that. So, you're getting sharper, you're getting more self-aware, more fluent in talking about your work. And sometimes the bad interviews are the ones that prepare you best for the one that counts. So yeah, instead of measuring your success about by how many yeses you've gotten, try measuring it in by your progress that you've made, how much more confident you sound, how much your stories flow, how much better you understand what you're looking for. Um, it's easy to forget this when you're feeling discouraged, but the job search is not a one-way evaluation, as I mentioned before. You're not being judged, but you're also choosing where you want to grow, So take what you've learned, dust yourself off, and keep going. Every conversation, even the bad ones or the tough ones, is building that momentum. And, the right yes doesn't require you to be perfect. It just requires to be you, on the right day in front of the right people. And that moment always comes.
What a great way to end this portion of the event. Thank you so much for that, Jamie. I want to make some space for questions from the audience. We've gotten a ton so far, so let's dive in. We're not going to be able to answer every single one, but let's see how many we can get through. Oh, and you can also follow Jamie on the Handshake feed for more, I'm told. That's exciting. Okay. So, Jamie, we got a question from Manal. I'm saying that correctly. If your primary contact for the job is through the hiring manager, is it a good idea to reach out to the specific person that interviewed you through LinkedIn or email, found from scavenging the company website, to thank them and ask any remaining questions? So I guess it's if your contact is with the hiring manager, you maybe don't have the
Like a recruiter.
interviewer's information. Is it okay to go and try and find that and reach out? How would you recommend proceeding?
Yeah, that's fine. I would always recommend like reaching out to whoever's like scheduling your interviews, whether it's the hiring manager or like a recruiting partner. Yeah, either is fine.
Yeah, I think if you reach out to the hiring manager, they will probably give you the person's email to say
Yeah,
thank you. That's pretty standard.
yeah.
Great. Okay. Question from Catherine. If the interviewer asks, do you have any questions for me? Would a good answer be, what would success look like in this position in 6 months to 1 year? Or is that bad slash presumptuous? Jamie, I think you actually recommended that question. I think it's a great one and
Yeah.
it can be telling.
Yes, that is one question that I always ask just because you learn a lot about like the expectations of the role, like what success looks like, and it aligns, what you're looking for with, what the company's providing. So I think great question to ask.
Yes, definitely do that one. We've gotten a couple of questions about whether folks will be able to watch a recording of today's session. Yes, you will. You're going to get a recording via email tomorrow, and we'll also post the recording on our blog tomorrow. So be on the lookout. If you don't see the email, check the blog, and it will be there for you. Okay, let's see. Okay. So we had a question from a Zoom call, or for a Zoom call, where do you recommend to look on the screen most of the time to look the most professional?
That's a good question. I would say try to line your eyesight as close to the camera as possible. I know Zoom is awkward because you can't read a lot of body language and it's over Zoom,
Yep.
but I would say try to make eye contact with the camera.
Totally. And if you have a second screen or if you have notes up, which I know some people will do, you got to be subtle about that. And definitely, like, I have a second screen over here, and it might even be worth turning that off so that you're not tempted to look to the side because that's going to look a little strange.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is a great question. Do you have any advice on how to approach the expected salary question during interviews? Is it something we should negotiate or wait until later in the process?
Yeah, I would say as a candidate, I always recommend like asking it on the first call, whether it's with the recruiter or hiring manager. And just a lot of states now require you to, or the employer to post about it on the job description. So typically it's already on there, but you can also confirm with them. Um, and then I would say it's totally fine to reconfirm once you're at offer or getting late stage or on like the prep call ahead of the onsite. Um, it's really important to make sure that, expectations are aligned so you're aligned for any offers that might come your way.
Totally. And that, well, I don't know if it really ties into this question, but you were kind of calling out, you can talk to the recruiter about that pretty openly at the very beginning, and then probably makes sense to wait until the end as opposed to bringing it up during, say, like a case interview or a behavioral. But Jamie, how would you describe the difference between a recruiter versus a hiring manager? Is there a difference in what each group is looking for? So typically you'll talk to a recruiter and then a hiring manager. How would you define the difference between the two?
Yeah, it depends on the company. Like some companies don't have recruiters, so the hiring manager is like acting recruiter. The hiring manager is the person that is hiring directly on their team, and the recruiter typically just helps out on process interviewing the candidate. For a recruiter screen, I would say typically more of like a light conversation. There are some questions that, like screener questions, I would say, that the recruiter is trying to ask you general like comp expectations, visa, uh, sponsorship needs, stuff like that, location. And then when you chat with a hiring manager, I would say typically a little bit more. It's like an extension of the recruiter conversation, but more in depth. So you'll get to hear directly from someone on the team what the role is like. They'll have some more in-depth questions and be able to speak to the role in a little bit more depth that than your recruiter will.
Totally. Great. Okay, I've got two questions about behavioral interview stories. So we had one question that was, when giving stories or examples, does it matter how recent they are? Can they be childhood stories if you connect it to present you? I'm curious for your thoughts on this. I would say proceed with caution on a childhood story,
Yeah.
unless you're talking about like your dream since you were whatever is to work at this company or something like that.
Yeah, I would say that's the right read. I would say as long as that you can connect it to like something that's relevant now. If you don't have a specific experience, like a work experience, like that's totally fine. But yeah, I would align with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think if you talked about like being a kid, you would then want to tie it to something more recent. So if it was like I was the, I don't know, president of my elementary school class or whatever, it's like, okay, and then how are you continuing to show those leadership abilities today?
Yes.
Um, okay, similar topic. During a behavioral interview, when explaining your experiences, is pulling multiple stories from the same job all right? What do you think?
Yes, that's totally fine. Especially when you're early in a career, like you're not going to have a million experiences or jobs to pull from.
Yeah,
I would say as you get more tenured in your career, of course, you're going to pull things from different companies, but totally fine.
cool. Okay. Well, y'all, we are right at time. So I know we did not get to nearly all of the questions. You guys had so many great ones. I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to yours, but hopefully you still found this helpful. My colleague dropped a survey into the chat. We would love it if you would take a moment to fill that out. And like I said earlier, you can follow Jamie on Handshake for more tips and tricks. And other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.